King Henry IV, reigned from 1399 to 1413. His reign marked the beginning of the Lancastrian dynasty, a royal house that would rule England for much of the 15th century. Henry's rise to the throne, however, was not a straightforward path to power. He came to the throne by deposing his cousin, King Richard II, an act that would have far-reaching consequences for both the monarchy and the political landscape of England. Henry IV's reign was a period of instability, marked by political upheaval, military conflict, and the ongoing struggle for dynastic legitimacy. Despite the turbulent nature of his reign, Henry IV is remembered as a king who successfully navigated the challenges of rebellion, foreign threat, and governance. His ability to maintain control over a kingdom riven by internal conflict, while also asserting English dominance in the 100 Years' War, highlights the complexities of his reign. Henry IV was born on April 3, 1367, as Henry Bolingbroke, the eldest son of John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster and Blanche of Lancaster. As the grandson of King Edward III, Henry was a member of the royal Plantagenet family, but his claim to the throne was not as strong as that of Richard II, who was the son of Edward III's eldest son. His early years were shaped by the political turbulence of his time, including his father's significant influence at court, and the fluctuating relationship between the nobility and King Richard II. Henry's father, John of Gaunt, was one of the most powerful men in England during the late 14th century, but his relationship with Richard II was often strained. John of Gaunt's role as a royal advisor and his claim to the throne through his paternal line put him in a delicate position, particularly as Richard II became increasingly authoritarian. This political context would shape Henry Bolingbroke's own future actions, and the struggles for power between the monarchy and the nobles were key to the events that would unfold during Henry's life. In 1394, Henry married Mary de Bohun, and together they had several children, the most notable being Henry V, who would later succeed him. By the late 1390s, Henry's fortunes were tied to the events surrounding the reign of Richard II. When Richard's rule became increasingly unpopular, Henry found himself drawn into the political maelstrom that would eventually lead to Richard's deposition. The most defining moment in Henry IV's early career was his role in the deposition of Richard II. In 1397, Richard had taken a more autocratic stance, purging his court of political enemies and undermining the power of the nobility. In response, Henry Bolingbroke, who was in exile due to a dispute with Richard, sought to reclaim his inheritance. In 1399, Henry returned to England with an army, initially to secure his ancestral lands in the north, but he quickly gained widespread support among the disaffected nobility who were hostile to Richard's rule. Henry's rebellion against Richard was framed as an act of restitution rather than a bid for the throne. Richard was effectively forced to surrender after a series of military defeats and political maneuvers. On September 30th, 1399, Richard II was deposed, and Henry Bolingbroke was crowned Henry IV. The deposition of Richard, while initially seen as a political victory for Henry, would create tensions within the kingdom, as many viewed his rise to power as illegitimate. The issue of dynastic legitimacy would haunt Henry IV's reign, as Richard's supporters and rival factions within the nobility would continue to challenge his authority throughout his reign. Upon ascending to the throne, Henry IV immediately faced challenges to his rule. His claim to the throne was tenuous, as he had deposed a legitimate king and was seen by some as a usurper. This perception was exacerbated by the fact that Henry had exiled or executed many of Richard's supporters, alienating key factions within the nobility. As a result, his early reign was marked by several uprisings and rebellions. The most significant of these challenges came from the Percy family, who were among Henry's strongest supporters in his rise to power. The Percys, led by Henry Percy, Hotspur, had played a crucial role in Henry's rebellion against Richard II. However, after Henry's ascension to the throne, the Percys became dissatisfied with the king's policies and his centralization of power. In 1403, the Percys, along with several other disaffected nobles, rebelled against Henry, leading to the Battle of Shrewsbury. At Shrewsbury, Henry IV's forces met the rebels in a decisive confrontation. Despite suffering personal injury, Henry emerged victorious, and Hotspur was killed in battle. The defeat of the Percy rebellion was a significant turning point for Henry IV, as it secured his position on the throne for the time being. However, the rebellion highlighted the deep-seated dissatisfaction among the nobility and the fragility of Henry's rule. The aftermath of the rebellion also saw a renewed effort by Henry to strengthen his control over the English nobility, seeking to curb their power and prevent future insurrections. Henry IV's reign was also marked by religious and social unrest. One of the most notable issues of his reign was the rise of the Lollard movement, a heretical religious movement led by John Wycliffe, which criticized the wealth and corruption of the clergy and called for reforms in the church. The Lollards' beliefs, which included the rejection of transubstantiation and the demand for the Bible to be translated into English, were seen as a direct challenge to the established authority of the Church and the monarchy. Henry IV, who was deeply concerned with maintaining the support of the Church, moved swiftly to suppress the Lollard movement. In 1401, he passed the Statute of Heresy, which made the denial of key Catholic doctrines a crime punishable by death. Although the Lollard movement never gained widespread support in England, the heresy remained a source of tension between the monarchy and the Church, and Henry's response to it reflected the close relationship between Church and state in medieval England. Another significant aspect of Henry IV's reign was his involvement in the ongoing 100 Years' War with France. Although the war had been initiated by Edward III in 1337, it continued to dominate English foreign policy throughout Henry IV's reign. Henry's position in the war was complicated by internal political issues, as the need to secure his position at home often took precedence over military campaigns abroad. Nevertheless, Henry made efforts to continue the war effort against France, particularly in 1410 and 1411. These campaigns, however, were not as successful as the earlier years of the war, and Henry IV's health began to deteriorate in the later years of his reign. His son, Prince Henry, the future Henry V, began to take a more prominent role in military affairs, and his leadership in the war would later define the Lancastrian legacy in the 15th century. Henry's attempts to balance domestic issues with foreign policy were further complicated by the growing political instability in his later years. The king's health was a constant concern, and his bouts of illness, which began in the early 1400s, caused political instability. By the time of his death in 1413, Henry IV had been largely sidelined in the military and political affairs of the kingdom, leaving much of the responsibility to his son, Henry V. Henry IV died on March 20th, 1413, after a reign of 14 years. His death marked the end of a tumultuous reign that had seen him navigate numerous political challenges, including rebellion, discontent from the nobility, and the complexities of war and governance. Henry IV was succeeded by his son, Henry V, who would go on to achieve significant military success and solidify the legacy of the Lancastrian dynasty. Henry IV's reign left a mixed legacy. On the one hand, he was able to maintain the throne and successfully defend England against both internal and external threats. His ability to secure his position, despite the initial illegitimacy of his reign, is a testament to his political acumen. However, his reign was also marked by frequent rebellions, discontent among the nobility, and the challenges of asserting his authority. The political divisions within his reign set the stage for the subsequent Wars of the Roses, a conflict that would devastate England in the decades following his death. King Henry IV's reign was defined by political struggle, military efforts, and the ongoing challenge of securing his dynastic legitimacy. His rise to the throne, through the deposition of Richard II, set the stage for a period of instability, marked by rebellion, discontent, and a growing desire for centralized power. While Henry IV succeeded in consolidating his rule and managing the internal and external challenges he faced, his reign highlighted the fragile nature of medieval monarchy and the deep divisions within English society. His legacy, while overshadowed by the subsequent successes of his son, Henry V, nonetheless marked a critical juncture in the history of the English monarchy and the Lancastrian dynasty.